Marhaba and welcome to Your Property Pulse, Knight Frank's dedicated real estate podcast for the Middle East. I'm your host, Faisal, partner and head of Middle East research. In today's episode, we're going to be examining the exciting world of branded residences in the world's two best-known 24-hour cities, Dubai and New York. The guests on today's show include Dean, who heads up our branded residences team in Dubai, and Georgina, who looks after branded residences in North America. Thank you both for joining us today. We've seen residential property markets around the world starting to bounce back following the debilitating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and some sectors have performed far more strongly than others, the residential and industrial sectors being two key examples, while others have lagged. So let's dive straight in and get the experts' view on how the branded residential market is faring at the moment in our two chosen 24-hour global hubs. Dean, let's go to you first. Could you tell us how you see the branded residential market in Dubai at the moment?
Yeah, hi Faisal. Look, it's Dubai over the last 5 to 10 years has really developed a love affair with branded residential real estate, with most of all the major brands and hotel operators all getting in on the action. Look, it's a very strong marketplace for branded residences in Dubai right now. There's already been a number of launches over the years of very high profile brands, lots in the pipeline. So overall, very strong. It's been a very long upward trajectory for the sector. So yeah, very positive outlook, looks very good.
Okay, thank you, Dean, for that really insightful overview. What about you, Georgina? What's your sort of take on the state of the branded residential market across the pond and a bit more, actually, I guess, over in the Big Apple?
Thanks, Faisal. Touching on New York, well, the branded residence concept it's obviously not new to New York. It was actually born in New York. And if you look back, the very first true branded residence was the Sherry Netherland Hotel, which was in Manhattan. And that opened its doors back in 1927. So if you look back in North America and New York, the branded residence concept can really be traced back to the economic boom of the 1920s in America. And really since this point, hotel branded residences have really been a key segment of New York luxury real estate, with of course much of this expansion occurring in more recent decades. And today in the US, we have the largest presence of branded residences in the world. And New York obviously being one of the leading destinations globally for luxury hotel branded residences.
Okay, that's fascinating. I hadn't realized that the market in New York was the largest branded residences market globally. Okay, so we sort of talked about where sorry, the US. I beg your pardon, the US.
But New York, one of the leading destinations, but the US is has the largest presence of branded residences in the world collectively.
I think Miami leads globally as a city right now. I think in terms of projects and what's going on over there, I think Miami is probably number one. But I think
Miami, and New York.
Yeah, definitely those three are heads and shoulders the leaders at the moment.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating. So we've sort of talked about where the market is at the moment then, but let's look a little bit further ahead. So where's the market going and what can we look forward to? So perhaps you could tell us how the branded residential market has evolved over the last 10 years. Dean, I know you and your team are doing a lot of work in Dubai at the moment, so perhaps you could start us off.
Yeah, it's been a really exciting kind of life cycle, really, I guess, with branded residences. I've been working on branded residences now since the late noughties, so around kind of 2009, 2010 was when I first started really kind of getting involved into branded residences. And back then, obviously, there's always been, an appetite for, urban and city-centric projects. But at that point, there was an awful lot of interest in much more far-flung destinations and those kind of hard-to-reach island getaways. Obviously, most of those projects were almost exclusively, aimed at, the super rich and very mobile, ultra high net worth individuals, and the projects were priced accordingly. But I think over the last several years, pre 2020, there has been an awful lot of interest in, and since kind of, the economic situation the world faced in 2008, 2009, 2010, there's been a lot more interest and a lot more investment into more investment grade quality projects, projects that are in very metropolitan, cosmopolitan locations, very urban centric locations. I think for a lot of owners of these assets, whilst they have been always, the rich, super mobile, I think at heart, they still want some level of security with their investment, particularly if they're spending millions of dollars on a home, which will often be second, third, fourth home. For a lot of these owners, they're collectors as much as they may collect, vintage cars and fine art. They also do collect real estate, particularly homes that, kind of carry a trophy status. I know, Georgina, you're working on some really exciting stuff in New York that, those kind of projects are very much in that trophy class, and, old, established buildings and.
Yeah, 100%.
I think for a lot of owners, they want to make sure that, these properties are, of the highest quality, and, they're going to be able to appreciate value over time. And then I think the great thing about branded residences is that it does afford owners that level of security from, being a well-run, managed brand. The building will be well looked after. I think so. For me, and for what the market's kind of telling us, it's about good quality projects in good quality premium locations, be it Dubai, London, New York, Miami, wherever it may be. These locations will always be, the premium places to live.
Okay. So Georgina, what about you? Is the view from the US any different?
Thanks, Faisal. Well, I think in New York, I think it's important to look back to say sort of the early 2000s, which is when we really saw in our market this resurgence of large-scale hotel branded condominiums which came to market. So, for example, the opening of the residences at the Mandarin Oriental in 2003, which was part of the Time Warner Center development on the southwest corner of Central Park, or the Baccarat Hotel and Residences. Again, that's sold out in 2017, boasting the world's first Baccarat Hotel and views of Central Park. So I think from the early 2000s onwards, these sort of signature hotel branded developments have really created a popular niche in the super prime segment in New York. And if we look at where we are today, 2021, we've obviously seen this continued expansion of the branded residences sector globally. And again, this segment of the market continues to grow in popularity. In New York, we're seeing this huge trend towards the concept, and particularly, of course, as recent events have really made concierge living such a significant priority for our high net worth clients internationally. So yeah, a huge sector, and I think really sort of, again, just touching back on this, the revival of the concept sort of post 2000 has also reflected this expansion of global wealth and the focus of New York as a key global city for high net worth individuals, which of course it is today.
I think also over the last 10 years, and perhaps even more recent than that. The branded residence space was always dominated by, the main luxury hotel operators, Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, Mandarin, Aman, Rosewood, all these guys that are, they're very good at what they do, obviously. But I think over the last several years, it's much more of an emergence from lifestyle brands, kind of. It seems that anyone nowadays, if you have a following, which is a really important point, and you're in, car manufacturing, jewelry, fashion, there's a lot of these brands which have really emerged, and when you're looking at development pipelines across the world, they're really gaining a lot of momentum because they have a huge fan following. Porsche, Bulgari, Versace, Cavalli, all of these, Lamborghini, all of these brands have very passionate followers. So I think that's one of the biggest shifts and one of the biggest emergencies we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years of these non-hotelier brands moving into the space.
I agree with that. And then I also think for New York, if you look at New York specifically, it's really sort of the historical brands that have retained sort of the branded residence concept. So obviously the Waldorf Astoria, we're imminently about to launch Mandarin Oriental residences on Fifth Avenue. The Aman, again, you look at sort of the Four Seasons downtown, which broke records when it launched. So New York sort of has retained this historical branded residence concept as opposed to maybe other places in North America, for example, Miami, like which we mentioned earlier. And even when I was in, I saw the Fendi residences in Marbella over the summer, and I think, there are contrasts in different markets, but that's certainly something we've seen in the likes of Miami, but perhaps not so much New York at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really interesting, Georgina. I mean, clearly there's a number of complex and interlocking factors at play, and certainly a number of things for developers and investors to be wary of. You've mentioned a couple of examples of projects that your team is working on at the moment. I mean, are there any examples of branded residences developments that are doing particularly well at the moment that sort of stand out in your minds? Can you give us an example of a particularly successful one in Dubai, for instance, Dean? What's made it such a success?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge amount of interest in branded residences in Dubai over the years, and I mean, to be fair, all of them have enjoyed their own successes in their own rights. I mean, Knight Frank have worked for a number of years on the Atlantis, the Royal residences next to the original Atlantis Hotel, right at the top of the Palm there. And it has been a very successful project. I mean, Knight Frank has sold in excess of 90 units of that project over the last several years. This is a project which is obviously owned by the Investment Corporation of Dubai and is operated under Kerzner. I mean, that's a huge project, very high profile. Celebrity chefs have got F&B outlets at the hotel, and over 200 residences are being built next to obviously a super luxe hotel component as well. Huge gardens and pools and amenities, that would kind of satisfy most buyers' needs. Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, Dubai has been a really great marketplace for branded residences. Most of the projects that have been launched here have been very, very successful. And
Dean, if we sort of cast our minds to the future a little bit, are there any new areas that we ought to be keeping an eye on in Dubai, specifically for new branded resi projects?
Yeah, Dubai, and I think Georgina will probably agree, Dubai doesn't conform to the usual structure that other cities has. You know, I mean, you could kind of, I don't know, put a pin in the middle of central London in SW1, you know, and that could form a bit of a basis for where that super prime market grows, and then you start to draw rings of radius out from, you know, let's say SW1, and you know, everything kind of reverberates around almost a central kind of point. You know, and I'd imagine New York is probably pretty similar to that as well. You know, if you was to put that in the middle of Midtown and kind of draw out from there, that, you know, it would kind of be like a shockwave of motion and price points. Dubai doesn't really work that way, in as much as, you know, it's a city of, you know, several halves, if that makes any sense. And you know, Palm Jumeirah, you know, arguably is, you know, for the most part, is considered, you know, a super prime destination. Emirates Hills is considered super prime. You know, some parts of Jumeirah, particularly Jumeirah Bay, you know, would be potentially considered super prime. And I know Knight Frank are doing some work on this at the moment, you know, where we're mapping out what these locations could look like. But, you know, as with all things, you know, these locations are always the first to be, you know, developed, and there are limited development opportunities in those locations: downtown, the Palm, you know, Emirates Hills. So, as with all things, you know, there will be a runoff. There will be a natural progression of where these areas will leak into other nearby districts and neighbourhoods, and those neighbourhoods and districts will then automatically be, you know, brought up in terms of value, in terms of price, and developers often cast their eyes to, you know, maybe a higher yielding opportunity. The likes of Business Bay is a classic example. You know, downtown Dubai has very few, you know, undeveloped plots available now. Wildly successful master plan community. You know, Business Bay is right on the fringe of that, and you know, we're seeing a lot of activity. You know, we've seen a lot of scale in terms of where those ticket prices for apartments are headed. And I think, Faisal, I think we even recently uncovered the first, you know, $10 million home sales in that in Business Bay recently, which, you know, is really great to see. And branded residences are already moving into that part of Dubai with, you know, the Dorchester and Mama Shelter and, you know, Missoni and a few others. You know, this is definitely the way things are headed, which is really exciting, because, you know, it's not just the Palm or your more established locations now. It's, you know, as the market in Dubai has matured, so have these districts, so have these neighborhoods, so has people's and buyers' appetites and investors' expectations. So that's really exciting to see.
That's amazing that we're able to see that evolution in such a short period of time, and new submarkets emerging. So speaking of new submarkets, so we've started to see developers from the wider Middle East region venturing further afield, but remaining, you know, largely conspicuous by absence in key markets like London or New York. I mean, Georgina, do you have any thoughts on why that might be from a New York perspective?
Well, I mean, we were chatting about this earlier, and I think, you know, New York is a very tight market. It has very limited land opportunities, and historically it's been sort of industry insiders who've known about these opportunities before others, for example. And typically, if you sort of look back, the trend has been for foreign buyers or foreign developers to really partner with a local developer on the ground who has the experience and knowledge of working and operating in New York, which is a very different market from other markets in the United States, as there is no MLS multi-listing system in place. So I think, you know, this may change going forward, but I think that has tended to be the trend to date. And then again, if you look at, for example, LA, which is obviously more of a single family home market, there's restrictions on, you know, new development and how much can be built in LA. And again, it's more about sort of experience. Some Chinese developers, some Asian developers have been successful in this market in the past, but that's really been when they've partnered with a local developer or builder on the ground, and then able to have realized its success. But I think typically in New York, again, it's, you know, a super prime global market. I think, you know, it tends to be that what we found is developers from other parts of the world partnering with a local partner on the ground, because again, it's a very different market to others in the US. But I think just touching on that, Faisal, you will obviously have seen in Miami, Damac are obviously the front runner for the Surfside site. So they made a bid of about 120 million.
I think also there are, I was talking with a colleague in London the other week, and I think Damac have also they've also got projects along the new you know, Battersea area that they're looking to do, where the new US embassy is going up. I can't actually remember the name of the project.
9 Elms.
9 Elms. 9 Elms, that's the one.
I worked on that project many years ago.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a great project over there. I think regional developers here. I think time will tell. I think also from London, on a similar narrative to New York, you know, both markets are highly sophisticated. The buyers are very sophisticated. The market is incredibly mature. I think the expectations for those prime locations in New York and London, the expectations are very high, and you know, the quality of the fit needs to be market leading. The amenities, the interiors, I think, you know, it's all well and good being, you know, on trend, but you know, the interiors need to be timeless. And I think you do need to have a real handle on exactly what that market expects from a certain price point. You know, it'd be nice to see, you know, some of the big regional players breaking more into these more mature, established markets. But I think the takeaway would be, you know, tread carefully and do your research and really understand exactly what it is the market wants, and exactly what they would expect to find from a project. You know, almost regardless of the price point or the demographic you're trying to hit. The competition is, you know, is of a very high standard. So, you know, it's not a case of build it and they will come. I think, you know, you really do need to know your apples before you head into a market like New York or London.
Okay. And then finally, could you perhaps in 60 seconds share your thoughts on the outlook for the branded residential market? Georgina, perhaps you could share your view on New York first.
Thanks, Faisal. Well, I think branded residences have proved extremely resilient throughout the pandemic, and we've seen that not just in New York, but I think as a business globally. For New York, we expect this trend to continue to play out, and there will of course be this continued focus, I think, moving forward around sort of this increased level of service, and again this huge focus on sort of wellness and well-being, which is what we're already starting to see. And of course, the provision around security and privacy will also remain incredibly important to the clients we work with on a daily basis. So I think, and look, just to touch upon here, you know, we launched sales at the Waldorf Astoria at the very start of the pandemic, so February 2020, and we've seen a phenomenal interest from buyers from Australia, Hong Kong, South Africa, literally all over the world, which sort of cements this case that, you know, privacy, security will always remain so important to the clients we work with, and to have, you know, this incredible, fully integrated service offering, which is what the likes of the Waldorf offer. We expect this trend to continue, as this will always be of such importance to the clients that we work with, and particularly from an international perspective.
And that you know, that just to quickly jump in on that, I mean, the Waldorf, I mean, it's a classic synergy of really what branded residences in the Lux market is all about landmark building, landmark, operator.
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. And sort of just to touch on, I mean, every conversation I have or members of the team have with sort of buyers from all over the world starts with, oh, I remember my stay at the Waldorf Astoria, or I remember getting engaged at the Waldorf, or I had my birthday party at the Waldorf. And there's so many incredible stories from all over the world, and that's resonating with the building, as you mentioned, Dean, its iconic status, and it's recognised worldwide. So that has been incredible. So I think, just sort of going back to where we started, not to go on, but again, they've just proved resilient throughout the pandemic, and we don't see this slowing down anytime soon. And actually what we're seeing is this increase in demand for branded residences, particularly in New York. Well,
it just offers, I think we spoke, we said earlier on this discussion that, the key differentiator for branded residences, which I think has become more apparent, as you said, Georgina, since early 2020, is the resiliency of the brands and the security and credibility that having a well-known brand, be it a hotelier brand or a lifestyle brand to a certain degree, having that name above the door, it does add a level of comfort to the buyers, that they know that this project is well funded, it's well looked after, it's well managed. There's a management agreement with the operator for 10, 15, sometimes 25 years for the Lux end of the market. And that just gives comfort and security to these owners. And I think branded residences have been able to weather the COVID storm really well. And these aren't isolated cases. I think if you look at some of the really big projects globally, it's all very much a similar trend, and that it is these brands, they charge a premium, and yes, these properties will always command a certain price differentiator depending on the market, but it's just about that level of comfort and level of security that owners are very happy to pay a premium for. And I think that can't be overlooked, really.
I totally agree, and I think just touching on, obviously, as I mentioned, the Waldorf Astoria, of course, and we also have residences at the Aman on Fifth Avenue. And again, with both of those buildings, I think buyers have this strong loyalty or affiliation to the brand, so they will therefore expect the attention to detail to, of course, be high, and trust that the property will benefit from the hotel brand's exceptional standard of quality, their management, and the services offered. So sure. Totally agree.
Okay, well, thank you both. It looks like we're just about out of time. So there you have it. The branded residential sector is alive and kicking, bringing us ever more exciting residential product in key global gateway cities like New York, Miami, and Dubai. And investors are hungry for ever more luxurious amenities, in part perhaps a direct result of the pandemic, as buyers and investors zoom in on their living arrangements. Join us again soon for the next episode of Your Property Pulse. But until then, thank you and ma salama.